First play of the second quarter, look at the dish. Little dime for Montrezl Harrell, who had 15 off the bench. LeBron 6 assists on the night. Lakers up 13. This is a good game. Fourth quarter, Lakers up by 2. LeBron turning defense into offense with the flush. He was 19 of 26 from the floor. Later, Cavs are down by 2. Colin Sexton. LeBron is there for the SWAT. They originally called this goaltending, but then they overturned that. Then it's LeBron from the logo. At that point, he had 36. And then he would eventually go out, step back 3, and he had 41. And then watch a little Bernard King baseline action here. LeBron James, 21 points in the fourth quarter, 46 points on the night. The Lakers are 10-0 on the road this year as they knock off the Cavs 115-108 in scoring that season high. LeBron becomes the oldest Laker with a 40-point game since Kobe Bryant scored 60 in the last game of his career. The 46 are tied for the fourth most points ever by a player after turning 36 years old. But that, of course, turns our attention to that man. Today is the one-year anniversary of the tragic death of Kobe Bryant. It was Sunday, January 26th of last year, when Bryant and his 13-year-old daughter Gianna and 7 others were killed in a helicopter crash in Calabasas, California. The days and weeks that followed were marked with emotional outpourings of grief and appreciation from around the world as people celebrated the life and the legacy of one of the greatest players of all time and one of the great legends as well. And we thought that to begin our conversation about that today, we would bring in our own Michael Wilbon. And Michael, thank you for getting up with us here today. And it is hard to believe that it has been 1 year in so many different ways. As you woke up this morning, what were the first thoughts you had relative to Kobe?
Well, Greeny, I started thinking about it, last night as I started reading some pieces about this 1 year anniversary. I guess we have to use that word. And, in this country, we weren't really locked into what was about to happen, COVID, until early March. And so late January, as we were getting ready to cover and indulge in the Super Bowl, this tragedy sent us into despair. And I mean that literally. More so here, but worldwide. But yes, particularly in this country, this plunged us into despair, the death of Kobe and his daughter and all the others. And I don't think we've come out of it. I mean, we've been in it. We've been stuck there. Obviously, with the pandemic, but also with this just saddening, this pounding, these deaths of Hall of Fame athletes subsequently, and maybe none of them were as tragic. I think just about this past few days with Henry Aaron, but at least Henry Aaron had a full life. At 86 years old. Mm-hmm. Kobe Bryant certainly didn't even have quite half of that. But I just started thinking about the despair that we have been in, and it started with that tragedy. To me, that's my time frame, and all these things tend to be personal. And so I've thought about that. I try to think of some happier thoughts, but I was really struck, and it resonated with me, what LeBron and Anthony Davis were talking about, and other Lakers, but particularly them, saying they didn't want to have just public commemorations all the time. And obviously this stays with them, and they are shaken by it still a full year later. And I thought that too. I mean, I know we're going to talk about it. That's our jobs to talk about it, but we are still in despair. People are still mourning. And so I don't know quite how you handle it, but LeBron and Anthony Davis and their sentiments resonated with me.
Yeah, no question. A lot of people are still having a difficult time with it, and I agree with you that it did set off a year unlike any that we've ever experienced before. But one of the things we can do a year later is try and smile in remembering him. What is a story about Kobe Bryant that you think of that always makes you smile?
There are a few, but one of them, and I talked about it a lot last year in real time, is that people saw Michael Jordan in tears and just so emotionally overwrought, and speaking at one of the memorials for Kobe Bryant. And Michael rarely does that sort of thing publicly. And people just didn't understand the kind of relationship they had. I got a glimpse. Some of that played out here in Washington when Michael was with the Wizards, as both an executive and a player. And when I went to a Lakers game, Kobe, knowing that I had a relationship for a long time with Michael, if he had a big game, 40, 45 points, a triple-double, who knows, when the media is lined up outside the locker room, Kobe would often just drift over if he saw me and I'd get an elbow in the ribs, and he'd lean over where nobody else could hear and just say, how would the old man have done tonight? How would your boy have done tonight? Would the old man have been able to beat them tonight? Would he have been able to beat whoever fill in the blank? And it was just so, and it was, I asked him, I said, look, can I talk about this on the air now or write about it? And he said, people aren't going to understand. They're going to take it the wrong way. And he was probably right. I knew how he meant it. I knew of the relationship. But it was so funny. This would happen periodically, over the years. How would the old man have done? And, people handle these things differently, but Kobe had such fun with it. And there was such a reverence, not just a friendship, a reverence for his basketball idol. And that I think about that, when you look at these big games, you just had on the screen, the cameraman said he had 60 points. I wasn't at that game, but there were games like that. And it was one of the first things he'd say. And I'd say, yeah, I'm going to call and tell him. He goes, pull out the phone now. Let's call. Let's tell the old man what I did tonight in case he wasn't watching. And Jordan loved it. He just loved it. And people did not realize we weren't in a social media time for most of that, if any of it. And they didn't realize just how much they adored each other.
The level of both competitiveness and respect between the two, I think, was legendary and remains that way. Michael, we appreciate your being with us today to share these memories. It is, of course, a day of solemn remembrance. It's also a day that we can try and celebrate his memory, and we want to do some of that. In the meantime, we figured while we had you, let's...
Mamba out, final game. Keyshawn, Jay, Will, and Zubin were presented by Progressive Insurance. All of our guests appear this morning on the Goodyear Hotline. There'll be plenty of discussion about Kobe Bryant. He is decked out. He's got the 8 for Kobe. He's got the 24 on the left sleeve for Kobe if you're watching this morning on ESPN2. And speaking of 2, he's got the 2 for his daughter Gigi, who also perished in that helicopter crash. I'm sure most people remember exactly where they were when they heard the news. Key, you have a personal connection to the story, literally and figuratively, with regard to proximity. Weigh us in. Take us inside your experience that day. Of course, Jay, he served as a mentor to you. We'll get to that as well as we remember Kobe Bryant throughout the course of the morning.
Yeah, it was one of those wild mornings, right? Everybody across the world, as the news kind of shocked us all. I was just at home in Los Angeles, in Calabasas, and I was in the bed, and at the time my wife was headed back from working out at the Mamba facility, which is wild, right?
Right. I mean, think
she called my phone, and I was like, you know how it is, your phone's vibrating over and over and over again. I'm like, right. What the hell do you want?
Right. It's early now on the West Coast.
It's early. I'm asleep. And so I'm like, oh, God. So I wake up, and she goes, you hear? So at that point, I'm like, hear what? And so I stand up, whatever. I get up in the bed. She's explaining to me. She goes, Kobe Bryant helicopter just crashed in Calabasas. I'm like, no helicopter crashed in Calabasas. She said, no, I'm telling you, turn on the news. So I'm thumbing through, trying, at this point now I got up, I'm turning on the news, there's nothing on the news yet. Now I'm looking through all the little stuff, I'm, looking, then all of a sudden things started trickling in slowly. I'm like, nah, man, hold on. So then I look out my window to try to see what I could see. Mm-hmm. And I can't see anything because it's cloudy, it's all the fog. Mm-hmm. So now I'm saying to myself, okay, she's like, it's behind our house, babe. I'm like, it's not. Okay, fine. I get up and I go, Zubin and Jay. I get in my car because I got, it's cold, so I'm not going to walk. I got in the car, believe it or not, to go down the end of the block to the cul-de-sac. And so as I go down the end of the block to the cul-de-sac, I start to see people coming that way from inside the community. It was probably 20 people or so. They're walking toward the end of the cul-de-sac because at the end of the cul-de-sac, you can look over the hillside. And I'm like, and so as I'm talking to people, I'm like, oh, so I see like guys that I know, Al Harrington and some other guys, and we're talking, and I'm like, oh man. So then I get in my car, go out of the community to around the other way to Los Virgenes, which is the street that butts up to the hillside, which is about 150 yards from my backyard.
Yeah.
And so at that point, the streets are blocked off, everything. So I park, I get out, I walk, and I'm talking, talking to people. I see more people that live in the neighborhood. And so I'm talking to like Kenyon Martin and just some other guys. And then I talked to one of the sheriff officers. I'm like, is that Kobe or whatever? And so he's like, can't say right now. So when he starts saying those sort of things, I'm like, wow. Then all the news of different people on the helicopter start to come in and different things start to happen. And so you, at that moment, you just like numb to the nth degree. Things start playing in your mind about everything. And, you know, and then you're not oblivious to certain things, right? We're not. And so as you just start to hear it, Jay, it just start coming in more and more, and phones start ringing and everybody. And then you look up within 30 minutes. I'm talking about, man, that entire area was just swarmed with Laker fans and Kobe Bryant fans.
You know, Key, 2020 has been a crazy year. I think we all can attest to that. And this is the first moment that it kind of kicked off the year, right? Like one of the first things that kind of kicked off all these series of events that started to occur. And it feels like 5 years ago that this happened, but at the same time, it feels like yesterday. It really does. It was something I feel as if everybody remembers exactly where they were when this story broke. I remember being at home with my daughter who had just been born and with my wife and thinking it was a prank, seeing it across like the TMZ clicker or whatever you want to call it, how TMZ reports it, and then getting the notice from ESPN, living there in Brooklyn before I was able to move, Key, and literally jumping in my car, still not even being able to process what the hell was going on. And then, Zubin, it's interesting that you and I find ourselves working together. That was, I guess you can call that one of the most official days that you and I kind of kicked off our relationship because, I was on air, 45 minutes later trying to process in real time, what a guy like Kobe, who was a mentor, like a big brother to me, meant to me in my life, and trying to articulate that to the world, really not having all the information while we were trying to sift through all that in real time while you were on air on SportsCenter all day long, interviewing people. It was just the beginning of a really challenging year, but also the day that I remember almost, I had a moment that happened to me when I got in my accident. I think this was another moment that it was a life awakening moment for me to recognize what I had in front of me instead of getting lost once again into the weeds or the frustration that we typically go through on a day-to-day basis.
Last thing I would say is Kobe Bryant is the Lakers' all-time leader, in points, minutes, and games. So it's a reflection, whether you're a casual fan or a hardcore Lakers fan, that Kobe gave you more memories in a Lakers uniform than any other Laker ever. More than Magic, more than Kareem, more than Wilt, more than Big Game James, more than Shaq. He is the Lakers' all-time leader in points, minutes, games. So any way you want to quantify it, 48 minutes on the clock, games